Summit Credit Union Needs Assessment. With the merger of two organizations becoming one, it would be a benefit to the new organization as well as all employees to undergo this needs assessment. First and foremost, with the blending of employees, it is important to have all employees on board believing in what the company stands for. Prior to the completion of the needs assessment, the new company that under Summit Credit Union needs to develop one mission to guide staff and to get all employees on board with the company's ultimate goals, which would be utilizing the needs assessment. Summit Credit Union would be able to see the problem areas that need additional attention, from training to even new perspective or motivation to these new employees coming on board. Why needs assessment? As stated, with a merger, skill sets and backgrounds of all staff, management, and line level employees are coming in, and maybe from the bank being acquired, this wasn't necessarily a good feeling for them. Maybe even the new employees, with millennials and an older generation, don't necessarily like change. So with that, maybe motivation and new perspective is needed as a guiding light rather than just primarily training. With any new lenders, it's important to understand lending guidelines and the fact that these guidelines are extremely strict. Coming in from a background of lending myself, with underwriting and processing errors, as well as newer regulations that are rolled out from federal backers like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and new trade guide regulations that were rolled out by the CFPB, lenders have an even harder time than they did ever before, pre-2008 and post-2008 market crash. It's more important than ever to get it right. Managers and associates may think that training is needed, but of course, with new motivation and perspective, as well as collaboration of these two companies, that could be ultimately the end goal, but the needs assessment would provide more insight into exactly where these problem areas lie. The first task in the needs assessment is always the organizational analysis, which is ultimately a way for any third party or the organization themselves to determine what appropriate course of action is needed, whether it be a new perspective or motivating staff, or if training is ultimately what's needed to get all these skill sets on the same page. With lending background, it's ultimately customer service, but is also informational on what types of regulations or what can and can't be said from a loan specialist to a loan officer in the processing of a home loan. Also, it's important during the organizational analysis to ensure that the business model is being followed. We don't want to add in, conflicting information with training, or conflicting information to employees that necessarily doesn't really relate to the business, or information with the merger. And then it's important for all associates, whether they're coming in new or current, to understand what resources they have available to them, whether it's going to training staff with any necessary questions, seeking the assistance of a manager, or even seeking that help of a peer. Again, this would be another reason why having that mission statement or business model developed prior to completing the needs assessment. That way all employees sort of have a way or the background to know who to go to for questions and how exactly to have these questions addressed. Completing a personal analysis would be the second step in the needs assessment. Basically what the personal analysis does is it helps for those in either management role or training role to determine or identify who exactly needs the training. It allows management to determine what deficiencies there are currently, but also to determine who is lacking the knowledge or the skill set in a particular area, or what the training issue is, or how to motivate those, whether they're not seeming engaged in their current role, or how to get them engaged so they are ready and willing to learn and accept change in training. There are a number of ways to conduct the personal analysis, which will be discussed a little bit further along, but just some examples or techniques for personal analysis would be through direct observation, where maybe there's timings involved for a specific task. So if, for example, a loan specialist making a follow-up call with a customer, how long does that call take, what tasks are completed during that call, and what deficiencies may be caught also within that timing. Other ways that can be conducted with the personal analysis would be, for example, questionnaires, which can be timely, as there are roughly 400 employees, and there'd be 400 questionnaires to basically go through and assess. So a questionnaire would not be used in this assessment. Another basically personal analysis that could be used would be online technology, so learning resources where compliance and information modules could be implemented and rolled out so that employees can take assessments, and ultimately the needs assessment can determine by those answers and scores on those assessments who's really lacking in some areas and ultimately need training. The third item to be completed in the needs assessment is that of the task analysis, which can be completed along with personal analysis. Ultimately, it lets the trainer or management know who exactly is completing what tasks, what their skill sets are, what their knowledge is, and of course what their behavior is, which again we kind of discussed along with the personal analysis. With the task analysis, it's important to identify who and what the strong abilities or the weak abilities are of some employees and determine ultimately what training needs to be emphasized with this select group or even a larger group. And then those on board would include all managers and trainers and employees who necessarily or all need some sort of training. I think ultimately including managers is a way for everyone to be on board, and as mentioned before, having a manager as a useful resource would be a benefit not only to the employee but to the organization. As mentioned in the previous slide, management would be directly involved in this needs assessment. It is important to have management on board, but to also see if there are any deficiencies along with their skill sets and training that are being implemented out to line level associates. Also training staff and all associates would be included in the needs assessment. It's a way for the company to get a well-rounded view of how training is being implemented and what exactly the needs of all staff are. As mentioned previously, there would be some actions to complete the needs assessment. These techniques would be employee observation, which it allows basically data to be pulled from the direct environment from these skilled workers. It also allows us to see what kind of errors or lack of knowledge areas these employees have. And there are some disadvantages that go along with employee observation, but I am willing to note that there are other ways to complete the observation without having someone directly sit with the employee. There are scanners where the employee can scan in a particular task that they're completing and then scan back out. With that data, it can all pull into one main area of several employees, so whoever is observing the data would be able to observe the data in a multitude rather than just one employee at a time. Other ways to use technology or to gather data would be through online quizzes or compliance modules and procedures. It would be a way for employees to be interactive with their direct learning environment, and a way for basically training staff to see who's failing in some areas or what shortcomings are being viewed to basically ultimately apply training to those in need. And then lastly, focus groups where employees can get together and discuss what areas or questions or issues they may have, where they're maybe unwilling to explore further information or need assistance in particular areas where maybe training staff, managers, or even peers would be the best course of action to assist to best address those issues or concerns.